during the Scouring of the Shire. There's rules posted everywhere. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, they return, they come over the bridge, and the first thing they see is a bunch of hobbits locked in this disgusting house where there's a list of rules on the wall. That you read that and you go, oh, this is a lot of times what liberal democracy looks like. This if you want to call it the HR-ification of government. That is what Tolkien hated. He despised it. He talked about throwing people in prison who used the word state in any other definition besides just referring loosely to what has historically been the nation of England. So that's what a restored monarchy looks like. Is Aragorn being a noble protectorate under the authority of the creator, which that essentially comes through like Gandalf. Gandalf is the mastermind, if you want to say that, behind him returning to the throne. Gandalf is pushing the events of Middle Earth in that direction, himself acting as the priest for the king. So that's what right power looked like to him.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because my next point was going to be him. The quote that people like to throw around is him talking about being an anarchist, right? Like, and they don't understand because they're not.
They never finished that quote, though.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, finish that quote. Actually,
so he says, "I could be described as an anarchist," and this isn't verbatim. I'm doing it off the top of my head, but I could be described as an anarchist, which is to say that I don't believe in whiskered men with weapons pointed at everyone, or. He says, or everyone stops at anarchist. He says, or an unconstitutional monarchist.
Right.
So it's like, those are very different, and you have to square those two. And what does he really mean by that? And what he really means is sacred monarchy, one that acts as an orchestra conductor that does not interfere with the family, church, or individual property owners. That's more, or the community, the village, if you will. That's more what he means by that. The power and the ability to solve a problem should be as close to the problem as possible. It should not be zoomed out. Tolkien hated the machine, and when he used the word machine, he's not talking about a car or a plane. He's talking about the machine in the abstract, the machinification of every aspect of our lives, the machinification of government, because now government is figuring out how to surgically control you, to surgically have a stake in every aspect of your life. That is what Tolkien repudiated and hated more than anything else.
And this is really what shows you that a lot of people have a cartoonish understanding of what a monarchy looked like, right? When you say the words feudal anarchy, like that, just for most people, like their brain just shuts down immediately when those two words are mentioned next to each other, because they're like, well, no, kings get to do whatever they want and they have total authority. Anarchy is the absence of authority, and therefore you can't have feudal kings and anarchy. But this is a terrible definition, right? The reason you ended up with feudalism is that the Europeans, after the fall of Rome, couldn't create centralized states. They didn't have the power. They didn't have the logistics. They didn't have the institutions. And so you needed this patchwork of different lords, different fiefdoms that were under the control of these different nobles. And the king was just the first among nobles, right? He was the top noble, but he still had to acquire the assistance of his bannermen. This is why you even get parliaments in the first place, right? The king basically needs a place where he can lobby all the rich nobles and get their money so he can go to war, right? But he still has to lobby them. Like, he has to convince them. If he doesn't have their banners, if he doesn't have their tax money, if he doesn't have their levies, then he cannot go and do what he wants to do. And so the king is in a constant negotiation with these nobles about like how to get things done. And that means it's very hard to centralize power in a state apparatus because so much of it is distributed down into the people. If you read something like The Ancient City by Collonges, you get the same idea that ultimately the different tribes and the different aristocrats and their control over their tribe the gens really kept the central power from Rome from being able to create this like organized state. And he marks the transition from kind of the republic inevitably to the empire, to the fact that over and over again, the central government destroyed the authority of these regional rulers, of these nobles, of these heads of the gens, these patriarchs. They lost the control of their over their people, and every time the people thought this was some kind of liberation, because look, this lord is no longer over me, but actually they were just handing that authority to the state, right? And this is kind of the argument I make in the Total State, is that what we've done is we keep handing power over to the bureaucracy in hopes that we can escape the power and authority of our regional rulers, these different spheres of authority. But instead, what we've done, instead of free us from government authority, we've just created a complete lack of barriers to overall centralization of authority. And so when Tolkien's talking about this medieval anarchy, it really is anarchy in the sense that there is no true central state, that it's all just a constant negotiation between these kind of regionalized powers. And that's what he was looking at. So when he said king, he didn't think centralized authority. He actually thought the opposite, that the king was a way to keep the authority from being totally centralized. So I just think it's interesting because so few people grasp what real monarchy looked like, that they just kind of think about some movie they saw where the king said off with his head, and like that's it, right? That's what kings are.
Yeah, it's important whenever you read any letter from Tolkien, you have to look at it from the perspective of a person who believes in idealism that the West once had that has been lost, right? Mm-hmm. And people are reading his letters and they see modern words in there that mean completely different things to them, and then they go, "Oh, look, Tolkien would have supported genital mutilation in a it's like crazy the conclusions I've seen people come to." But the one point I wanted to make is, a lot of people ask, like, okay, well, what is the power, like, what does Tolkien mean? What does the power level look like of a monarch? And I mentioned the quote about, he's like, or an unconstitutional monarchy. It's not because he doesn't not support in an ideal world a constitution because he doesn't believe that the king's power should be restrained. He doesn't support a constitution because, and it's for the same reason that a lot of the anti-federalists didn't want to have a Bill of Rights, right? They don't want to have a document that says, here's as close to the line the king can get before committing evil, right? Because then you can figure out ways to get around those. So that, if I had to take a guess, was why, and I believe I'm right, was why Tolkien believed that. It wasn't so there would be unchecked power, but that there would actually be, in the long term, more checked power, because you wouldn't have a situation where the king knows exactly what he can and can't get away with. And more often than not, those documents actually tend to deteriorate, right? And the governing power tends to get away with more and more and more as time goes on. And if you talk about the patchwork and the medieval anarchy, you could ask yourself the question, like, who's more powerful, the local lord or the king? Well, it depends on who you ask, right? Because a local lord is going to have more loyalty from the people, if he's a good leader, from the people who live under him and are closest to him. So that's where their loyalty is going to lie. And that's the kind of society that Tolkien thought was best, right? Is local people having the most loyalty to whoever their local leaders are. And that creates this, fighting factions oftentimes actually creates a better situation, right?
Right.